Everybody says that Redis is an in-memory database, which means Redis stores the data in the RAM. But you know that after server restart, the RAM gets cleared out. So the question arises, if Redis stores the data in RAM and after server restart RAM gets cleared out, then how does Redis persist the data even after server has been restarted? Let's find out in this video. So it turns out that yes, Redis serves all the reads and writes directly from the RAM, and that helps it to get the maximum speed, but it also continuously syncs or logs the data to non-volatile storage like SSD or hard disk in the background. So Redis has these two mechanisms using which Redis stores or syncs the data in the disk. So let's see how this works. So the first mechanism that we have here, we call it as a AOF, that is the append only file. Whenever any read or write happens in the Redis, so Redis does that read and write in the RAM, and side by side also it updates the logs in a file called AOF file in the disk. Okay, so suppose that you have inserted some data, you updated those data. Redis does not update the data in the AOF file, instead it stores the logs. You can say the transaction logs in the AOF file. And now after server restart, Redis just looks up AOF file, and from here it has all the logs, right? So it just replaces the logs, and that way Redis can reconstruct the data. Okay, so just know that here in this AOF file, it doesn't actually store the data, but instead it stores all the transaction logs, which during data recovery, Redis just replace those logs. That way Redis reconstruct the data from the log. And there is another mechanism which is called as RDB, that is the Redis DB. As and when any data is read or updated in the RAM, Redis does not store the logs here, but in this mechanism, Redis periodically takes the snapshot of the RAM and stores that in the disk. So maybe it could be like every 5 minutes, Redis will take a snapshot of the entire RAM and it will store that snapshot in the disk. So during data recovery, Redis will just take the snapshot from the disk and it can recover the data from the snapshot that it has already stored in the disk. And in this process, Redis doesn't block the main thread, so creates a sub process like bg save that will do the background save. So it doesn't block the main thread, it creates a sub process called bg save, and that takes the snapshot and it stores that into the disk file. And this bg save process, it gets a copy of the RAM at that point and it stores that information in the disk. So the fundamental difference between these two attempts are that in the AOF file, we are only storing the logs in the disk, we are not storing the real data, but in the RDB, we are not storing the logs, we are taking the snapshot of the RAM and we are storing those snapshot in the disk. Now, if you just compare the pros and cons between these, so since in the AOF file there is a less chance of data loss because you are storing for each and every transaction you are storing the logs here, so you are not losing any data. But the downside is that the logs are getting really large because for every write and update operation you are updating the logs, so logs can grow really long. And also the recovery time is slow because during recovery time you have to scan through all the logs, then only you will be able to reconstruct data. So the recovery time is slow here. And whereas if you compare it with the RDB snapshot, so data recovery definitely faster here because we don't have to scan through all the logs. Instead we already have the snapshot, so we can easily recover the data. But the risk of data loss is there in the RDB snapshot because if you take the snapshot every 5 minutes and Redis crashes after the 4 minutes, then the last 4 minutes, that's data that is gone. You will not be able to recover that data because the last snapshot you had taken, that is 5 minutes ago, and since that there has been no new snapshot has been taken which has this 4 minutes of data. So I hope this video was useful. Let me know what you think on this one, and as always, thanks for watching.